Welcome to a Fruitful Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, Multi Apples, and I will be discussing some of the major wrestling shows that aired within the past week since last week, Monday, November 30th, 2020. So I'm going to start out with Monday Night Raw, which start off with a segment that made zero sense to the story. It was a moment of bliss interview between Alexa Bliss and Randy Orton that made no sense whatsoever. It added nothing to the story. Uh, WWE is trying to make the Fiend Bray Wyatt a good guy, face, hero, so to speak. And they just sort of had him being baited, like trying to protect Alexa Bliss. I don't even know what role Alexa Bliss serves in regards to Bray Wyatt. They don't make that very clear. They should have had Randy Orton as a villain and just attack Alexa Bliss. Or, yeah, just attack Alexa Bliss and have The Fiend Bray Wyatt make the save. But they didn't. So then the first official match of the night was between Jeff Hardy and Elias. And it was a Symphony of Destruction match. And basically the point of the match was they could use any musical instrument that surrounded the ring. And they could have used that on their opponents. And it was a good match overall. I love those hardcore matches where they're allowed to use weapons. But unfortunately, Jeff Hardy performed a dangerous move and took a dangerous bump where he sort of swanton bombed himself into Elias, and Elias was on the table, and he sort of crashed through the table with Elias on the table, and put Elias through the table, and pinned Elias. Now, the only problem with that is Jeff Hardy's head hit the steel steps, and it looked like he could have easily knocked himself out or sustained a concussion. And at best, sustained a concussion. And thankfully, he didn't end up being hurt. Um, to my knowledge, he didn't sustain any injuries, which is a miracle. The way that move was performed, which it shouldn't have. Match shouldn't have ended the way it did. It should not have. That move should not have been performed. If you want to put your opponent, if you want to have Jeff Hardy put Elias through a table with that move, don't put it where he can easily give himself a concussion. That was just too risky, in my opinion. It also, you also had the 24/7 championship segment occur in the middle of that match when they ran into the ring, and it didn't make any sense. That added nothing to the match. They could have had the wrestlers chasing the 24/7 champion at any other time in the show, and they didn't need to have that during the match. Mustafa, following the match, he had Mustafa Ali. He cut a talented promo with the rest of his stable of Retribution. And unfortunately, they're just booking Mustafa Ali and the Retribution stable as a whole very poorly. They should be having Retribution booked as a dominant stable, as these 4 or 5 male wrestlers and this one female wrestler just dominating everybody and just beating everybody on the roster in easy fashion. And they're just not doing that over the past week. The the names of the wrestlers with Mustafa Ali are just horrible. Like you have Slapjack, T-Bar, Mace, Reckoning. Those names for wrestlers are just awful names. I can't take, as a wrestling fan, I can't take that group seriously with names like that and with the booking the way it is. I can't I can't take their agenda of changing the WWE very seriously. Up next was Slapjack versus Ricochet, which was just the match was booked very terribly. Um, I don't remember who won, so that goes to show you how bad it was. Slapjack should have easily beat Ricochet. Um, and Ricochet is a fairly talented wrestler in his own right, but that goes to my whole point of just making Retribution look strong and have the storyline go somewhere. And WWE is not doing that. You had Sheamus and Drew McIntyre talk backstage after the match. It just builds story. I know they want Sheamus to be a villain and turn on Drew McIntyre, so they're doing a good job with that. You had Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler versus Lana and Asuka. And that was a fantastic match. And Lana's story against Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax. Um, just that story so far has been phenomenal. My one problem was that Survivor Series. I would have had Lana easily beat Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. No, sorry, I misremember. They're on the same team. I would have had Lana still win the Survivor Series match, but I just wouldn't have had to. I wouldn't have done it the way they have done it. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go into it. So, but the story going forward has good potential. Xavier Woods versus Cedric Alexander. It's a good match. It was a decent match. Not too many complaints there. I would have had Retribution interfered, and I would have. Cedric Alexander is part of the Hurt Business, the stable, and they seem to be feuding with Retribution. And I would have had the Hurt Business turn to a face, which a face, for those of you that don't know, is a good guy. In this case, it would be a stable or a group of good guys feuding with Retribution, and I would have made Retribution look strong, and I would have had some sort of. I would have this feud go until WrestleMania and have it mean something. But unfortunately, WWE and management has not made Retribution look as dominant as they should be, and they've not built the Hurt Business as good guys, which is very lacking, very bad on their part. Next, you had AJ Styles versus Riddle versus Keith Lee, and it was a great match. I'm glad AJ Styles won. I just think with the allegations made towards Riddle a few months ago, a while back, this year, they should have suspended him, and they. But in terms of storyline wise, they should have. Well, first of all, with the allegations, they should have just suspended him until everything was sorted out. Now, in terms of the promos in the match, Riddle is a good wrestler, but he is just, in my opinion, as a fan, intolerable and annoying as with the promos. And if they want me to support him as a good guy, I just can't take him seriously with the way he's cutting his promos with his character. Dana Brooke faced Reckoning, and Reckoning should have won that match easily, but instead they had Dana Brooke win. Management had Dana Brooke win. Made no sense whatsoever. Okay. Then you had just another backstage segment. Then you had Sheamus and Drew McIntyre versus John Morrison and The Miz. And he had AJ Styles on commentary, which I'm glad AJ Styles was on there. And I would have had, with the backstage segment, they basically planned for AJ Styles to interfere so The Miz can cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase to become WWE champion. And I felt like if they were going to go through with that, they should have made The Miz WWE champion. And they should have made it They should have made a match a triple threat match at the next pay-per-view between The Miz, AJ Styles, and Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship. And I would have had John Morrison trying to interfere. I would have John Morrison trying to interfere in that match. And Sheamus help Drew McIntyre win the championship. If that makes any sense. Since you want to have Drew McIntyre and Sheamus feud at some point later in the future, I would have just basically Sheamus try and help Drew McIntyre win until you have Sheamus turn on Drew McIntyre. And even if you didn't want to have The Miz cash in his Money in the Bank, I wouldn't have had him. I wouldn't have had AJ Styles interfere and have The Miz almost cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase. So next up was NXT, which aired on Wednesday. Show begins with a Pat Patterson tribute, who had sadly passed away early on Wednesday. And they had some select fans and trainees and trainers chant "Thank you, Pat," for everything Pat Patterson has done for the wrestling business, especially for WWE. And he's done so many things I just can't get into it right now. Johnny Gargano was on commentary for the first match it was a tag team match between Damian Priest and the NXT North American champ Leon Ruff versus Legado del Fantasma, which consisted of Raul Mendoza and the intern NXT Cruiserweight champion Santos Escobar, and Joaquin Wild was their managing the match. Overall, I just loved how Johnny Gargano taunted Damian Priest and Leon Ruff during the match, as this was the go-home show for the pay-per-view NXT Takeover War Games that happened this past Sunday. And it made sense that Johnny Gargano would come out on heel, just trash talk Damian Priest and trash talk Leon Ruff, as those three men are going to be fighting each other for the NXT North American Championship. So that made sense. It was a great match. And then there's a good cinematic promo for three of the four members of Team Shotzi. You had Rhea Ripley, Shotzi Blackheart, and Ember Moon. And at the time, you didn't know who the fourth member of Team Shotzi was for the NXT Takeover Women's War Games match. So I just loved the cinematic promo was good. I felt like that went well. They need to do more of that. The more cinematic promos. Speaking of cinematic promos, then you had one with the Undisputed Era, who are good guys. I can get behind the Undisputed Era as good guys or bad guys. I like the way they're booking them. So essentially, after that, it's just towards the end of the episode. You basically had Austin Gray versus Cameron Grimes, and it was a squash. It was a squash match. Nothing really special. Both wrestlers were talented. I'm a huge fan of Cameron Grimes, and I'm buying him as a good guy. And I'm glad Dexter Lumis, I believe it was either Dexter Lumis or Timothy Thatcher, came out and freaked out Cameron Grimes. Because Cameron Grimes and Dexter Lumis are feuding at NXT TakeOver War Games. They had a match. And Dexter Lumis, which is kind of odd to have him as a good guy when he's supposed to be this psychopath, this sociopath who's very creepy and who's like a stalker. It's weird to have him as a good guy, but I'm interested to see where that feud goes if that feud continues. And so yeah. So you had next match was Jake Atlas versus Tony Nese. That was the match of the night. Both wrestlers are talented, both are good. I'm looking forward to seeing them both more on the NXT and hopefully the main roster. Next, I loved. Next up, you actually had Pat McAfee, the former NFL punter for the Indianapolis Colts. He came out with his teammates Danny Burch, O'Neal Organ, and Pete Dunne, and he cut a fantastic promo insulting the fans and insulting NXT and insulting Undisputed Era. And as a wrestling fan, it made me hate him, which is his job. He's supposed to be a bad guy. He's supposed to make people hate his character, and he did a fantastic job doing that. Then he actually had a weird promo involving Xia Li and Boa. Not really sure where they're going with that. You had Xia Li and Boa just coming in and out of this tank of ice, or this bath of ice, with cold water and cold water. I don't know what they're doing with that. I don't know where they're going with that. Then you were supposed to have the Grizzled Young Veterans versus Everrise, but that never happened due to Imperium attacking Everrise. So, I'm a huge fan of the Grizzled Young Veterans and Imperium. It was my first time seeing those teams wrestle, and that was the second best match of the night. It's a shame it ended in a DQ with Everrise interfering. It's weird that they have them on not Everrise, but it's weird that they have Imperium and the Grizzly Young Veterans on NXT, considering that they're all mainly British and or Irish wrestlers, and they're on NXT, which is the American developmental territory, not NXT UK, the British developmental territory. So I'm kind of confused with why they had that match there on NXT instead of So then there was a good promo featuring Timothy Thatcher and Tommaso Ciampa, and a good match between Shotzi Blackheart and Raquel Gonzalez, which I'm surprised Io Shirai was the final member of the team. So yeah. You had AEW Dynamite, which I'm going to pretty much be going over this since I don't have that much time left. The Dynamite Diamond Battle Royale, which that was one of the better matches of the night. I'm glad MJF and Orange Cassidy won that match, and they're going to wrestle each other next week. I like the way that match went. You had Chris Jericho with Jake Hager and Ortiz versus Frankie Kazarian. And I love that there was tension in between MJF and Wardlow and the rest of the Inner Circle. Made sense that Jericho won, and that Jericho gave an ultimatum to either separate the Inner Circle or they all get along. Then there was a promo between the Young Bucks and the Acclaimed. The rap part was my favorite part of the promo. Britt Baker with Rebel. It's Rebel, but they always call her Reba. Britt Baker always calls her Reba. So it was Britt Baker versus Layla Hirsch. Great match. Thunder Rosa attacked afterwards. AEW TNT champion Darby Allin and Cody with Arn Anderson faced Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs with Taz. You had Taz and Arn Anderson as the managers. It was very predictable. The brawl was predictable. Sting making his debut completely floored me. Kenny Omega defeated Jon Moxley for the AEW. That was the match of the night. Nice to see a heel Kenny Omega, and I'm glad he won the AEW World Championship. Him showing up on Impact Tuesday is going to be interesting. You had Rampage, then I'm going to go over to NXT. You had Rampage Brown versus Saxon Huxley. Rampage won. Rampage Brown won. You have Effa Valkyrie defeat Aaliyah James. Then you had Joe Coffey defeat Alexander Wolf. You had Wildboar and Primate being managed by Eddie Dennis defeat Mark Andrews and Flash Morgan Webster. Good match. And SmackDown opened up with a nice tribute. And I'm going to have to... And then, yeah, so that's it for NXT UK. For SmackDown, open up the good tribute. SmackDown was an okay show. The 6-man tag match was fine. I can't complain about the Carmella and Sasha Banks promo or Murphy and King Corbin match, but the Otis and Kevin Owens match was predictable. And then NXT TakeOver War Games had a fantastic card all around. That was the show of the night. All matches were good. Definitely check that on the pay-per-view. Thank you for listening to a Fruitful podcast. I am Multi Apples, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.